so glad that you were able to fight your way through the raids and find your way to the keep, adventurers. I'm hoping, no, I'm praying that I might ask you a favor on behalf of the town of Greennest, that you might use your talents to help us. Governor Nighthill was talking with our adventurers when we left them at the end of our first session, and so at the beginning of session 2 of my company going through the Hoard of the Dragon Queen, we find themselves standing on the top of a parapet of the keep, overlooking the town of Greennest, as it is in flames. And I'm going to stop here and say, spoiler alert. So if you have any wish to actually play through the Hoard of the Dragon Queen, I would say stop watching this video now if you want to be surprised. If you don't, and you're looking forward to finding out how I handled the Hoard of the Dragon Queen, specifically Greennest in Flames, then by all means keep watching, because there's going to be all kinds of spoilers as we talk about this. So Governor Nighthill is pleading with the adventurers before him to help him out. The town of Greennest is in flames. The cultists and kobolds and some other very large creatures that they haven't seen yet are ransacking the town, stealing whatever they can find, hauling them off in various directions. At this point, from the top, they can actually get a better view of what's going on, as well as a better view of the very large blue dragon that occasionally flies out of the storm clouds above to lightning breath a small section of the town before flying up. And we'll actually start with that dragon, because at the moment that the adventurers are talking with the governor, he comes down, does one more strafing run of buildings on the southern side southern side, before coming to rest on the far side of the stream on a small hill overlooking the town, looking very smug as he overlooks everybody. The governor is pleading with them to help. Specifically, there are two tasks, two things that he would love to have done. The first of which is the town's mill is under attack. It looks like that some of the cultists are trying to burn the mill down, and thereby removing the food supply for the town of Greennest for the winter. If that mill burns, then the town is in dire need of food at that point. At that point, they don't even know if they would actually have to move out of Greennest to be able to survive. Then look over, and the next task is also that some of the townsfolk have gathered, or are trapped, I should say, inside of the temple on the other side of town, surrounded by cultists and kobolds, some banging on the front door with a makeshift battering ram. Other ones are circling around, throwing things at the windows, trying to find ways in. And there's more in the back that they kind of see. There's smoke coming from the back of the building from where there's some movement, from where they can see the temple. I expressed both of these to the adventurers, or specifically, Governor Nighthill expressed it while he was in agony, looking like he'd taken a few blows himself getting into the keep, and asked them to take one of these missions on, and the next one would be taken on by his lieutenant, a fighter, a police fighter, the name of Lady Grey. So, and this is part where I love sandboxing. If you watched my intro video where I gave a little more background about myself, I grew up doing campaigns where you laid out a skeleton work of your campaign, let the characters come out and be created and fleshed out and give you your backstories, and then you weave their backstories into that campaign setting and your storyline that you wanted to bring them in, right? And I always sandboxed everything and created things just whatever fancied, to be honest, and whatever my players fancied at that moment. And in this past couple of weeks, I had come across the homebrew race of the Fleece, the large cats, not tabaxi or anything, but actual cats. That the story was they were like sorcerer and wizards familiars that eventually came to consciousness and became sentient. And I thought this was awesome. It was Puss in Boots, right? It's Puss in Boots wearing armor. And to me, I fell in love with it, and I said, you know what, I got to throw some kind of character in here. And so I came up with Lady Grey, who's a fleece fighter, straight-up fighter, who works for the governor. Because, in my opinion, the governor of a town the size of Greennest wouldn't just have one hero-esque character. Escobar the Red is the dwarf that was introduced earlier. By the way, there was a dwarf. Go watch the first video. And he plays bigger parts later on, too, in this one. But anyway, so yeah, Escobar the Red. I figured the governor would have at least a couple of good fighters, mercenaries even, or just, people he could rely on in the running of this town. In my vision, Escobar kind of takes on the role of the head of the guards. He's the guy who manages security, shall we say, for the town. And Lady Grey takes care of more of errand running. I need messages taken, that he didn't want to fall into somebody else's hands. Somebody he could trust to relay messages, take messages back and forth. And so Lady Grey, the police fighter, was born. So Nightail explains it. The adventurers choose whichever one they want. He's asking a favor, so we'll let them choose, if you'll help him out. And then Lady Grey and a handful of the city guards will go take on the other task. And that's where he opened. The party decided to take a short rest while they discussed this. They licked their wounds, they bandaged themselves up, and decided what they were going to do. After a lot of discussion, they decided that they were going to go after the mill, because the food source is more important to the town overall, and the villagers and townsfolk that are trapped inside of the temple looked like they at least had a stronghold. It was a brick building, it was a stone building, they were holding their own, and they could fight back, whereas the mill was unguarded at all. And I think that was the final swaying point. It was 2-2 of my 6-person party on who was going to go through it. So eventually they decided on the mill. Now, the problem is you're now trapped in a keep that is surrounded on and off by cultists and kobolds. And how do you get out? And this is the point where Escobar the Red comes up and he explains, I have a key, and it's to the water passageway that brings fresh water to the keep, and it's a tunnel that leads underneath the town out to the stream. So he leads them down into the basement, and this is the part where we came across a little funny moment, in my opinion. So if you don't know who our characters are, I do encourage you to go back and watch my session 0, where I go through at least an introduction of all of them. The gnome that we have, the gnome ranger Melanie, has a beast companion by the name of Walnut, the dire raccoon. Now, this raccoon stands as tall as a horse and is twice as wide. He's a very large raccoon, and at this point they are making their way through the common room again and on their way down to the basement. At this point, Walnut sees Melanie come down and immediately jumps up, toppling a few children that were playing on him, and comes lumbering over and, let's go, let's have an adventure. And they lead to the first standard-sized door. And Walnut doesn't fit. It's a door. The keep was not made to have animals go through it. So after a short time, the party looked over their spells and their inventory and tried to find a way that they could bring Walnut with them, but unfortunately they don't have anything at their ready, and they don't have anything prepared. They're level 3 characters with not that many magical items or scrolls or anything they've collected so far. They've just started off. I mean, they're adventurers, obviously, but they have a limited amount of resources. So unfortunately, they had to leave Walnut behind to guard the children in the keep. And a great little exchange happened between Escobar looking at this raccoon that's larger than him. I mean, he's a dwarf and he's looking at a raccoon, right? That's as big as a standard horse. And he timidly leans over to Melanie and says, "Is there any chance, lass, that you'd be willing to at least leave him instructions that he listens to me, or even to Leanna Swift of the family that he's been with? He's an awfully big beast." At this point, Melanie, of course, laughs and does give him instructions that he is to listen to Escobar and listen to Leanna Swift for any instructions, and she'll be back very soon. And gives him a scruff behind the ears, and he solemnly wanders over, and he does it. At this point, so they find their way down into the keep, into the bottom of the keep, move a bunch of crates, find their way to the grate that leads down to the water access. They crawl into the water access. So I don't know if anybody else has actually ever walked through a drainage system for a city or a town. I luckily actually have. So it was kind of easy for me to describe how a brick and stone water system would work. At this point, I described it as being about 7 to 8 feet across and wide, roundish, done with large bricks, very similar to the way that the keep was maintained and was built out of. In a roundish fashion with a kind of a little bit sunken in at the bottom, kind of a trough to be able to make sure extra water came in. Maybe it was added later, but that was where the water level currently was flowing in. There was debris all on the sides and along the and somewhat floating on top of the water at certain sections from, the occasional high tide, tree limbs, or other things that had accidentally kind of floated in when you have large grates at the end that don't block everything. So the party mines their way down there. They light a torch for the one human so that he can see, and proceed to make their way down. The marching order at this point is the half-orc barbarian Naris is up in the front, and then you had Melanie, the ranger, behind her, the gnome ranger behind her. Then I want to say you had the dwarf druid and named Rosalind, followed by Remy, the half-elf rogue, and then you had, I want to say it was Lutau taking up the rear at that point and coming up the rear end. At the end of the line, then they're slowly making their way through, and they make a few perception checks. They see nothing, because nothing's there, until finally at some point the orc steps in something that squeaks and makes noises and moves, and at that point is when a swarm of rats attacks. Not just one, but because again they're level 3 and I scaled everything up, there's only supposed to be, I think, like 2 in the initial adventure. I gave them 5. Now, granted, not all at once, but staggered through the chunk of this tunnel that they were in. So they decide they do pretty good at dispatching them. I think one of my favorite lines is the fact that Lutau threw back his bow and drew, and managed to, I think, basically shish kebab about 7 or 8 rats along one arrow, which gave us a very interesting visual, skidding across the floor. The best moment, I think, of at the same time is that if you haven't ever fought anything that's a swarm can actually occupy the same space as another creature, because there are lots of little things. So the swarm ended up finding Melanie and going around her. Now we have a medium-sized swarm of tiny creatures that has enveloped around a small gnome, in essence, completely covering her. Unfortunately, they sucked, apparently, at attacking. Didn't actually do much damage. Didn't get above her AC. At this point, though, she's batting at the rats. They're all over her. They're swarming around her. And he comes up and actually manages to reach in, grab an arm of the gnome, and pulls her up and puts her, shakes her off and bats a bunch of the rats off and then puts her on her shoulder, and then proceeds to flat great axe the pile of rats and does a good chunk of damage. Actually, I take that back. Her attack was actually later, but you get the idea. That manages to wipe out an entire swarm of rats that way. They dispatched the rats relatively quickly. It wasn't memorable. I know that apparently if you're level 1, this could actually have been a very memorable experience. I've read from when I was doing my research before I did this into some campaigns that apparently had almost total party kills from just swarms of rats. So do be careful with them. But my party had fun with them, and a bunch of them said it was the first time I actually deal with swarming, so that was kind of fun. So we move on, though, and they find their way to the end of the tunnel. And this is the part where it gets a little interesting, and I got a lot of good role-playing out of the end of the tunnel. So when you get to the end of the tunnel, there are some cultists and kobolds that are searching around. And in this case, there was 3 cultists and 8 kobolds searching the banks of the river, or of the stream that this empties out to. So the party sneaks up, they make some stealth checks, they get to the edge of the grate, and they look around. Now, point of order, Naris actually has a great axe of warning. And she has been very adamant to remind me of the fact that if anything comes within 30 feet, that she is allowed to know about it. And anybody she's friends with knows about it. Gonna have some fun with this. I have some plans to see if we can get around this great axe of warning. But anyway, so she's like, they get to near the grate. They know that there's people out there. So they sneak up. They look at the grate. They get an idea of how this works. Now, being the fact that, again, I'm trying to use a bit more tactical combat kind of stuff, I was using some great tiles that my wife got me for our anniversary, which were awesome. You know that you found the right person to fall in love with when their response to our anniversary gift is to buy you giant dungeon tile map pieces, which, again, awesome, babe. Still love you. I set it up so we had the stream, and I laid some blue felt down the center of it on the wide tiles to kind of give you an idea of the stream bed, and then had one section of tile that was only 3 spaces wide as the end of the grate. So I started it off at one end, the end closest to me on one side, and I'll put up some pictures too, so hopefully you guys can get an idea of this. And so as they're looking, and the numerous, I think 11 models of the kobolds and cultists are looking around and searching the banks for anybody who's hiding in the pussy willows and in the stream, possibly. They're also not looking too wholeheartedly. I kind of was playing it off that the kobolds, especially, were not happy to be searching a riverbank when they'd much rather be ransacking buildings and breaking things. Because, in my opinion, the way they describe them just kind of reminds me of some, like, 8-year-old boys wanting to just rip everything to shreds and being rambunctious. So that's kind of how I'm playing the kobolds. So if you have 8-year-old sons, you know what my cultists look like. My kobolds are acting like. So they're not happy to be searching the riverbank, so they're not really paying that much attention. So as they're talking about this, and to represent the fact that they are slowly searching the riverbank and moving down en masse, I kept every couple of minutes of them talking, I would move the tile that the party was on down the other tiles, so that it slowly in representation. Here's the piece, here's the river, and then they're slowly being moved this way to represent the party moving without having to move 11 models all the time. So they're talking about it. They end up walking back to out of range of hearing from them and are whispering like how they're going to go about this. It's an old, rusted, weathered gate. At first, thinking of being rusty and everything, the Naris, our half-orc, walks over and puts the key in because she's going to try and get the lock loose. And so I tell her it's a dex roll. So Naris sticks the key in, makes the roll, doesn't make it. Doesn't make it poorly, though, so she doesn't break the key off or anything, but just it's not quite working. So then Remy, our half-elf rogue, is going to try, and she fails it, but not, again, by too bad, just not quite getting it. So at this point, Nerys wants another try. She does it, and she manages to make a dex roll, and the key unlocks. Okay, so now the door is free. It's not locked in place anymore. And they start to move it, and of course, it's a big weathered grate. And they stop. They knew this was going to happen, though, so they moved it a little bit. They told me as soon as it makes noise, she was going to stop. So, okay, it's making noise. And this is where I got to actually give out my first inspiration point. Now, some point here, I've been playing 5e for a while now with my other campaign, as well as a smaller campaign with my daughters. So we have my daughter's campaign and then the Wandering Few, which we've done a couple of months' worth, the first chapter, shall we say. But one of the things that I never quite remembered to do was hand out inspiration. It's not something I was used to doing because inspiration wasn't around back in some of the old days of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons and 2.5 and the stuff that I played back in the day. So one of my players, and again by first names only, Heather, who is playing the cleric. Sorry, brain freeze. The cleric actually found me some inspiration tokens. So she found me these wooden engraved inspiration tokens, which I think these are freaking awesome because it's also good because I'm a very physical person. Having the stack of these sitting by my DM screen reminds me to hand them out. And at this moment is where I got to hand out my first inspiration. I got to give it to Remy because Remy looks over at me and says, all right, Remy has a nature background, and I can't go too much into that without giving away too much of her character that she hasn't wanted to give away yet. But she does have a nature background, and she says, I want to see if there's anything in the moss or in any kind of natural slime or other stuff at this edge of this waterway, this entrance, this freshwater source. Is there anything natural that I know is viscous, is lubricant, has lubrication properties? And I go, I don't know. Make a roll. So she makes a nature roll, and she gets, I don't remember exactly what the score was. It was like a 22 or 23. Excellent. And I said, you know what? You find some slime and some algae and some other stuff that you feel has very good viscous qualities and is very slippery. And she proceeds to gather up a bunch of it and shove it into the hinges of the door. And I had them roll, and they started moving the door back and forth, and it went from and slowly quieted down, because that's what happens when you work some kind of lubricant into it. And, a natural slime or something like that, sure, I'm going to let it happen. And it was a great idea, and I was able to give Remy an inspiration token for that. And so that was the first time I've actually ever handed out an inspiration token. Sorry. Big deal for me. Maybe not for everybody else who's been playing 5e for the last couple of years, but it was a big deal for me. And with my new coins. So, they get the door open. They're about 2/3 of the way. Most of the down, the guards have walked past at this point. And now they start planning how they're going to do this. And they end up coming up with the strategy that the ranged people were going to pop out first and shoot off a couple of rounds, and then the big fighters, so at this point actually would be the biggest and the smallest, half-orc was going to charge out and take out somebody, and then Melanie was going to run out and go backwards a little bit and take out the last couple that way, and then it would leave the druid and the cleric kind of playing support. So Rosalind and Arkin to play support coming up afterwards. And they start rolling, and they just are rolling off the charts. We're talking not full nat 20s all the time, but we're talking high teens on almost everything. So at this point, Lutau takes out the one cultist he was going after in one shot. But actually, take that back. Shoots him with the arrow, then runs up and punches him with the key point. Takes him out. Melanie knocks out the one that the kobold she went after. Remy kills the two that she was throwing daggers at. The two kobolds she was throwing daggers at. Nerys, the barbarian, runs out, just kicks just slashes and kills the guy. Like, I can't remember exactly how much damage. I think she did almost like 3 times as much damage to the kobold than what it needed. She flattened it and made it slime itself. In one action, all 6 of them managed to take out 7 total enemies in one round, and that was their surprise round. And then we got to roll. Then we got to go in a normal round of initiative. By the time everything got said and done, there was only like 4 kobolds and 1 cultist by the time they actually got a turn. So though I made a couple of rolls, the kobolds, being stupid and easily impressionable, are told by the 1 cultist remaining to attack them, and then he proceeded to pull a 50-yard dash down the back way. And he's running down the stream trying to get away. At this point, though, Rosalind looks at us and goes, she came out, she wasn't able to figure out exactly what she wanted to do. She decided that as soon as she left the grate, she turned into an elk. Now, I had a ranger for a little bit, but this is really the first time I played with a ranger a lot. So, not a ranger, I'm sorry, a druid. Let me back that up. I apologize to the rangers. This is the first time I played heavily with a druid. Now, I had a druid in my other campaign, but I knew kind of what that player liked to turn into. I'd never done an elk. I had no idea. I'm going to look up stat blocks real quick here. So, an elk has a move of 50. The cultist had a move of 30. They both decided to dash. At this point, you ever been run down by an elk? Well, this cultist knows now exactly how it feels like to be run over by an elk, because that's exactly what happened. Now, as weird as it sounds, she caught up to him. Unfortunately, had to use her action to move, but then when he got to his turn and he went, there's a giant elk running at me. And if you don't know how big an elk is, just go YouTube it. She got an attack of opportunity and proceeded to just hoof slam him into the ground and killed him. So at this point, the other kobolds came running up to the other party and were quickly dispatched. So that group was relatively removed within, I'd say, 2 rounds. Have you realized that my players are actually doing pretty decent at this point? I realized at this point I needed to make sure I upped the difficulty level a little bit more than what I had been. Before, in all these encounters, I've been adding 2 to whatever kind of enemy they told me to do. So if the encounter called for 6 kobolds, I gave them 8. If it called for like 2 cultists, I gave them 4. You get the idea? So that's what I've been doing. I realized at this point I needed to up that just a smidge because they are walking through what I've been throwing at them and taking very little damage. Now, I knew what was going to happen, by the way, before somebody rips me apart in the comments. I knew this was going to happen because I did take level 3 characters and put them into a level 1 part of the campaign. Now, part of the reasoning for this for me, if you go back to my first videos, is the fact that at level 3 is when I feel like the good stuff starts to happen. And 2, it gives them the chance that, as some of the new players are getting a chance to know their characters, to not feel like they're really at the end of the world. I've read so many times where this scenario of the grind that is the Greennest in Flames, the one night of combat with no chance to really take a long rest throughout this entire time, could be a drain and almost a TPK on some of these people, on some players. You're not even supposed to get level 2 until the end of this. So I know that that's what's happening. But my players are feeling really good about it. They're feeling like badasses, and that's really all that matters, right? They're having a good time. So I did decide I was going to up the difficulty level and decided to start adding 3 to 4, depending on what I roll. So at this point, they're making their way down the stream, making their way to the mill. The way I rolled this is that I was rolling every time they came past houses down the stream. And if you go on a chance, go take a look at the map of Greennest. It's available anywhere. Google it. And they're walking down. Every time they came across houses, I would roll to see whether or not there was any cultists there, and then whether or not there was anybody who was paying enough attention to see them in the stream. As it turns out, they rolled pretty good, and there was a bunch of cultists, and when there was some cultists, they managed to pass their stealth rolls, and things were fine. They snuck past them. They decided not to attack anybody in the houses. They really did stick to the plan. There was opportunities. There was like 6 different opportunities for them to go attack more cultists and kobolds, but they did. They were good. They stuck to the plan. They followed the stream all the way to the mill. Almost to the mill. Like I want to say it was the last encounter. The cultists and the kobolds do notice that they're in there. I make them roll some stealth checks, or at least they haven't been paying attention, shall we say. They make some stealth checks. Everybody passes, except the elk. Rosalind is still an elk with a gnome on her back, because Melanie is riding on the back, because a gnome has a movement of 25. So, this is where I give out my next inspiration token, because it goes to Melanie for this one. At this point, Melanie immediately stops and says, "Can I say something?" I said, "You got 6 words." And she leans in and she whispers into the ear, or whispers to Rosalind the elk, "Eat the grass." Now, at first, I was going to make Rosalind do a Constitution saving throw. In fact, I was in the process of telling her if she eats the grass, she said, "I'm going to eat the grass." I say, "Okay, make a Constitution." And as I say that, she said, wait. And feel free to argue with me all this day long, but this is what happened. She says, "So if I changed into a moose, everything physically about me has changed into a moose. Wouldn't that not mean that my taste buds have changed into the taste buds of a moose?" Now, the taste buds of a moose would like the taste of grass because it is of their diet. It's what they would desire to eat, and therefore they would want to eat it if it tasted good. So green leaves and vegetation are going to taste good. I said, "Okay." She's like, "And I know I need to eat the grass to pass off as an elk, and grass is like salad. I don't think I should have to roll." She's a veterinary tech, by the way. So I let it pass. I said, "You know what? Fine. No Constitution." But I said, "I will pick this argument that it may not be a Constitution saving throw debate to eat if you decide to eat something you're not used to or something very disgusting. But there might be some other saving throws you might have to make, like an intelligence or wisdom check to make sure you can eat it if it's disgusting." We all agreed. I let her pass. She leans over. She nibbles on the grass or on the foliage on the edge of it. At this point, I was like, you know what? It's a really good roll. I throw an inspiration token to Melanie for the idea. I roll again for the cultist. The cultist passes it and says, "Yeah, nah," or fails the check. He believes her. He tells the kobolds to go back to work, and they continue on. I thought that was a great bit of role playing. It was awesome. They bypassed what could have been another conflict. They could have killed some more. So they move on to the mill, and at the mill at this point is surrounded by 4 different cultist guards, just so they have a different stat block, and they're trying to ignite the mill. Now the mill's not burning for some reason, and they're kind of looking around trying to find other things to do. They're throwing torches on it. They're trying to look around, trying to find other burning things. At this point, I saw like one of them trying to burn a crate, set it on fire that they get in through, and the party decides that there's no talking to them, and they just charge in. Wipe the floor with the first 2 that was closest to them. The second 2 come running around the corner, and they attack those 2 and take them out. Now, between the acts of warning and then the elk pointing out that Rosalind now has a really high perception as an elk, they realize that there's actually more bad guys inside of the building. And that they don't know how many, but there's definitely bad guys in the building. So they send, and this is another great moment. Again, look up how big an elk is. An elk is huge. It's a moose, okay? It's a moose. I have a great story from when I used to work in the off-road industry of somebody actually hitting a moose with a bumper, but I digress. They put Melanie, still riding the moose. They put Melanie on the moose's head, holding onto the antlers, and she then walks over to the hayloft window and pushes Melanie up to the point where Melanie can sneak in. She makes a stealth roll. She's fine. She looks in. She starts going. I say, you get halfway in, and then you realize that the entire upper hayloft of this barn mill, is completely packed with cultists. And she goes, "Oh," and she backs up, and they go back to the group, and go around the corner, and they talk and go, "Okay, it's completely packed." And this is where Arkin really shined for a moment. She decided she was going to use her booming voice, and she yells in Draconic at the barn for them to come out, that the siege is over, they're needed to help ransack, or they're needed somewhere else. Now, the thing is, these are mercenary cultists. They don't know Draconic. I didn't tell them that. They don't know, but I'm rolling, like, to give you an idea, by the way, up the scale, there was 16 guards, cultists, and acolytes. There's different descriptions. They mean something else. You'll figure it out when you play it, because unfortunately I didn't play much into this at this moment because of what happened next. But I'm rolling like crazy to figure out whether or not they believe her. Now, what I ended up figuring out through the rolls and from my own interpretation, she keeps talking, by the way, and she drops from both common and Draconic, telling them to come out, give up, is that they know Draconic is talked by the bosses and by some of the people that have hired them talk in Draconic. And so they would only know to surrender if they were. But then half of them aren't buying it because if they hired them, they should know that they don't know Draconic. But maybe they're talking to somebody else too, like it's a general announcement kind of thing, not necessarily directed at them. And that's why it's being said in common as well. And so I ended up basically saying that about 6 of them wanted to go, where it said they would step out and find out what's going on, while the rest stayed in the trap that had been set. And so the 6 walk out. And at this point, Arkin walks forward. Now, of course, this is a party of adventurers, a random group of people. They're not dressed like the rest of the cultists, but the cultists did hire a lot of mercenaries. So it wouldn't necessarily be unheard of that they might not have met them. This could have been a different band. So they're on guard, but they don't attack right away. And they ask, like, okay, who are you and what's going on? And she keeps pressing them. It's like, well, it's time to give up. We need help ransacking the rest of the buildings. Give up on the mill. There's nobody else. There's nobody else here that's not needed. And she keeps stepping closer. Well, they keep stepping back every time the Arcane steps forward because they're keeping a distance. They don't quite trust what's going on yet. And what Arcane was waiting for was for them to back up enough that that she would be 15 feet away from her own party. And the reason for this being is that, and she then asked me, it's like, are we at 15 feet yet? And I said, okay, sure. After a little bit, you guys are at 15 feet. She says, okay. I jump forward the last little bit, and I cast Thunder Wave. And that's why she wanted to be 15 feet away. So she casts Thunder Wave. She rolls her damage. They roll their saving throws. All five out of the 6 fail their saving throws. The last one passes it, so he takes half damage. But she rolls enough to kill them. At this point, they were regular cultists. They only had 11 hit points. She rolls enough to kill all of them. The one that didn't die, that made his saving throw, of course, doesn't die. And I go, okay, so he doesn't die. She goes, all right. But how much damage did he take from his friends? Because I said it was the one furthest away. I figured that would be plausible, right? The one furthest away from the spell might be the one to take the least amount of damage. How much did he take from the bodies? So I don't know what the actual rule is. So on the fly, I go, fine, 1d6 per body being flung at somebody is what's going to... She rolled, papa. And she rolls like 7 damage, which is enough for him to die. So she manages to obliterate 6 cultists with 1 spell. Boom. Awesome play. I also say at this point, they were actually close back to the barn again, or to the mill. Blows the door off the mill, and they actually now can see there's more cultists inside, taking up defensive positions around crates and stuff inside. At this point, the battle commences. Lutau is shooting his arrows through. And by the way, Lutau was actually rocking the rolls at this point. At one point, I was not expecting to have to ask for initiative, and I do the same. I don't know about anybody else, but I say, okay, hey, everybody, all right, who's got 20 to 25? And he's really happy. I saw he got a really happy roll. He was really happy when he rolled. And I say, 20 to 25. And he doesn't say anything. And I start to say, okay, 15 to 20. So Henry goes, ah. And he says, I got a 28. Monk. All I'm going to say. So, Monk goes first. Lutau is positioning himself to shoot. Now, the way I had this set up, though, is we had one map with the actual mill on it. And then I had another map over here that was the inside of the mill, because the model I was using wasn't one of the ones I could take apart and put people in. So he was trying to line himself up between 2 different little map pieces to make sure that he could shoot through the door and fire at people, even undercover, and he was taking them out that way. The rest of the party goes charging in, except for the moose, because Rosalind doesn't want to change out of her moose, and she's not fitting through the door. We're running into the Walnut situation again. So she stays outside while the rest of the party runs in. She also, though, at this point, flings Melanie, like does a head flip, and throws Melanie through the hayloft and into the second story. Now, Melanie was expecting more cultists to be up there, and she's actually disappointed to find out that the cultists that were at the top had actually gone down. So she takes a couple of pot shots from the railing down on 1 or 2. They end up just marching through them. They're what do take some damage this time because the cultists are better positioned and they're using some flanking and cover to protect themselves. At this point, though, I think the next best moment that happened out of this was the fact that Melanie really, really wanted to get one of them from the far side. And so she actually asked me, I was like, well, is there any way I could get across in one movement? She doesn't have enough movement to get all the way across this mill to get to the guys on the other side. Because at this point, most of them have been destroyed. I actually said, okay, fine, these are mercenaries. I'm not giving them that hard of a roll. Like, I'm giving like a DC 15 for constant, like 10 if half the party was destroyed, and then 15 if like they're at 3/4 of the unit was destroyed. I'm making them roll to see if they can, hold their will. And they failed. Last 3 guys are 4 guys, 3 of them are running away, 1 stayed. Melanie wants to get one of them before he gets away. She asks, is there any ropes or anything? I say, sure, there's some ropes hanging from the ceiling. So she totally, like straight out of like Indiana Jones, grabs a rope, swings across the loft, leaps off, and 2 hand axes to one of the cultists trying to get out the other side of the hayloft. Made her roll. She makes 2 acrobatics checks back to back. She then makes her to hit roll and then her offhand hit and obliterates this guy after swinging across the hayloft. It's a great moment. She turned in her inspiration token to be able to pull it off. Awesome time. She loved it. Totally cool. Now, at this point, one of the guys actually does make it to run away, get outside the back of the hayloft, goes up the ladder, out the back, falls, and jumps out the back end. And I made him roll, made him make an acrobatics check just like anybody else, and he fails it. And so he broke his leg on the landing. I figure that's pretty, you jump out of a barn. Town of... Sorry, I almost died. And that's when I tell her it's a dex roll.